merci d'être venu. Je sais que la date de la conférence tombe pas au meilleur moment, d'après ce que j'ai compris, dans le timing des examens, mais en tout cas, je pense que vous avez bien fait, parce que pour ma part, je suis très content de pouvoir accueillir Pablo Eiroa ici, et je dirais maintenant, parce que Pablo est donc, pour le dire brièvement, je ne vais pas, vous pouvez consulter son site et énumérer tout son CV qui est impressionnant, mais Pablo est professeur d'architecture, je dirais même, pour préciser, de projet d'architecture, dans une école tout à fait particulière à New York, qui est la Cooper Union for Advanced Art and Science School, et qui est une école qui a la particularité, et c'est important de le préciser, d'être, entre guillemets, offerte aux étudiants par un groupe de mécènes qui investissent, je dirais, dans les esprits innovants pour la science et l'art de demain. Et donc le mot « advanced » n'est pas un effet de langage, c'est véritablement un investissement dans non seulement une pratique, dans une discipline, mais aussi, derrière ce mot, dans la recherche. Et ce mot recherche, il est important parce que ce que Pablo va vous présenter ce soir, ce n'est pas uniquement le travail d'un enseignant, ce n'est pas uniquement le travail d'un architecte, c'est véritablement, je pense, ce que l'on fait de mieux dans le domaine de l'enseignement et la recherche conjugués ensemble au sein d'une institution qui apprend le projet d'architecture. Donc, je dirais, ne vous étonnez pas, la façon d'enseigner, la philosophie de l'enseignement de cette école aux États-Unis est véritablement de questionner non seulement le projet, mais la méthodologie du projet, la façon dont on travaille l'architecture aujourd'hui, et la spécialité de Pablo dans ce domaine, c'est précisément d'interroger, je dirais, l'interaction, la venue de l'outil informatique dans la façon dont on fabrique le projet aujourd'hui. Donc je vous donne juste un petit exemple pour être plus précis. Ils essayent par exemple de ne pas travailler en géométral. Il n'y a pas de travail en plan, pas de coupe, pas de perspective parfois, pour essayer simplement, je dirais, d'investir le territoire de projet de façon alternative pour trouver d'autres territoires de forme, d'organisation des fonctions, etc. Donc, ce que vous allez voir n'est pas à prendre comme un résultat, mais comme une réflexion critique à l'intérieur du projet d'architecture pour mener à bien, je dirais, de nouvelles démarches, de nouveaux processus. Et donc, c'est à prendre à un niveau assez, finalement, fondamental. Et le travail que font des professeurs comme Pablo est, en tout cas aux États-Unis, perçu comme très important parce que c'est d'une certaine façon la matière grise qu'on n'a pas le temps de développer, je dirais, dans le feu de l'agence. Donc ça peut paraître fondamental, mais tout l'objet de ce travail très précis, vous allez voir, très fin, sur les procédures d'organisation des formes et de calcul des formes à travers l'utilisation de l'outil informatique, n'a que pour objet d'être appliqué ensuite dans le cadre du réel travail d'architecture. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, a little
Good.
bit.
Are you agree? Okay.
Yes, sounds good.
Donc, à ce titre, en tant qu'enseignant-chercheur, Pablo, qui est professeur à la Cooper Union depuis 5 years, 10 years? Depuis 10 ans. D'ailleurs, il a même eu une médaille, hein, parce qu'aux États-Unis, au bout de 10 ans, on a une médaille quand on est professeur. Donc, en gros, a aussi donc, des responsabilités, puisqu'il dirige maintenant un master au sein de la Cooper Union. Il n'est pas uniquement enseignant, il est responsable en fait pédagogique d'une des filières de recherche de l'école. Donc, c'est pour toutes ces raisons qu'il était important maintenant que l'outil informatique fait véritablement partie de notre façon d'investir le projet, d'avoir quelqu'un qui a un recul critique sur cette question. Pour la petite histoire, J'ai rencontré Pablo lors d'un congrès aux États-Unis en 2010. Ce congrès qui s'inscrit dans une série de congrès qui a lieu tous les ans qui s'appelle Acadia est destiné à réfléchir sur la question de l'informatique et de l'architecture. Ce congrès a eu lieu à la Cooper Union sous l'égide de Pablo, et ce congrès a donné lieu à un ouvrage, un premier, puis un second que vous avez peut-être eu dans les mains, ou en tout cas qu'on a fait acheter à l'école. Et c'est, je dirais, à partir de ce second ouvrage qu'on a décidé de dispenser un petit peu le contenu de cet ouvrage à travers différentes institutions. Donc, ce que Pablo va vous présenter ce soir est la suite de réflexions déjà entamées en 2010 à la suite d'un congrès et qui se trouve, je dirais, en écho à son travail et à la Cooper Union et dans cet ouvrage. Donc, vous pouvez toujours vous y référer pour approfondir les questions qui vont être soulevées ce soir. Donc, merci Pablo de nous éclairer sur ces questions complexes. In English, maybe? What? Ah oui, la conférence, Pablo s'exprimera en anglais. Or in French, if you...
No.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Thank you, Alexi Meyer, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Did you mention the fact that I'm going to talk about the book and that you are also part of the book, right? Or maybe...
No, I didn't mention that you can find a text. Okay. But
maybe
we are here for you,
yeah.
not for me. But juste la particularité de cet ouvrage, c'est que c'est pas lié à Pablo, qui en est l'initiateur avec Aaron Sprecher, qui n'a pas pu venir, ou moi qui y participe, mais il y a une quarantaine d'auteurs, en fait, qui sont regroupés à l'intérieur de cet ouvrage. Do you have a picture of the book? No.
Later.
Bon, on pourra vous le... Tu l'as apporté? D'accord. Bon, on a un exemplaire à Strasbourg qui est très, très recherché, qui passe...
C'est le professeur d'informatique qui est parti en vacances avec...
Bon, je crois que grâce à Didier, d'ailleurs, on a fait acheter le livre en question à la bibliothèque.
I have some images of the book.
Okay, but I think we bought it in the
library.
In the library,
okay.
But the library is closed.
Okay, all right.
Bon, enfin, si vous cherchez, vous trouverez facilement les éléments que j'ai évoqués. Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alexi, for the invitation, and thank you for the institution for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in Strasbourg and to be talking about these things here with you. The first, I want to make a couple of maybe warnings. I believe that the main issues of the book have to be sort of introduced through certain, not only theoretical problems, but actually exercises that somehow present the conditions through which we were interested in following certain kind of problems. So I'm going to organize the lecture in 3 parts. The first part is going to be an introduction of why information is important today. The second part is going to be more about the relation between computation, algorithms, and cognition problems. And then the third part is going to be the book itself. I'm going to show you how the book is organized and what's the content of the book and some images of the content of the book. The first warning that I wanted to sort of present is that I don't know if I am a formalist, but I believe that form drives function in a certain way. So that's like you're going to see a lot of projects that they are formally driven, and one of the oppositions that my work consists of is the fact that form has the capacity, at least formal autonomy, right? Has the capacity of informing function, although there are certain projects in which I pay a little bit more attention to formal functional organizations and relationships, which then they feed into the form. But because form has this sort of autonomy, form is a little bit more stable than function. I believe that functional conditions are cultural readings. So people react to buildings every generation, so every maybe 10 years, 15 years, and buildings have a longer life than 10 or 20 years. Therefore, the spatial organization, the relation between the form, the organization, and such as circulation, inhabitation, and space, and the form, they are a little bit more stable and long-lasting than the functional organization. In any case, that's like a first sort of statement. And the reason why I'm saying this before getting into the issue of information processing is that because form is in itself a problem, we are faced today with several problems, which is the fact that the way that we do form is as important as the way that we think about spatial organization and buildings. I was going to follow a little bit some notes that I have here, but I think that since we are a smaller crowd, it's going to be more interesting to make it a little bit more informal, and maybe we follow a discussion after the presentation. But if you feel that there is something that you don't understand, maybe you can interrupt me, and I can maybe expedite a little bit more on those issues. As I was saying, the important thing is how we create form, but not only because of form in itself, but I believe that there is currently there is a political, if you want, will and a political obligation of the architect to get involved with the processes that are related to how we do architecture, what methodologies we develop to do architecture, and what are the consequences of those methodologies. And one of the most important things, I believe, today is the relationship that architects have with protocols and algorithms in themselves. A little bit the context of why architecture information has to do with the fact that we are all running algorithms all the time. We have cell phones, we deal with Google, we deal with Facebook, and all of these interfaces in their own, they not only that they change the way that we relate to the world, but they change ourselves, they change the way our brain works. So it has to do with cognition problems, and they manipulate mass behavior directly, right? So I believe that if you do not understand what's happening in Google when you search for a certain information, you are a little bit a victim of that interface because you are not really aware of what are the processes that are happening behind that lets you or guide you to go in a certain direction in terms of a topic, research, etc. I believe that that is a problem, and that's the reason why we got so interested in the things that you do not see about how form is being made. That's the reason why we were interested in coming up with an architecture of information, thinking that there is a specific relationship between things that you see and things that you do not see. So there is a spectrum in terms of how you develop architecture. One spectrum is based on the codes, the deeper structures, and that, let's say, algorithmic logic is maybe part of that. And on the other hand, you have the visual, things that you see, things that have to do with perception and how you absorb that information processing. So to me, it is important today, if you're a young architect or if you're an older architect, to be aware of what are the processes that are engaged in terms of what you're doing, to have more control of what you're doing, more intellectual control, and to have a political statement relative to how you're working with that. So I'm going to start talking about certain problems. So I talk about formal autonomy. I believe that we are under a second digital revolution, although the fact of saying that there is a constant revolution is already in itself a problem, because I believe that digital architects, they claim that every time there is a new technology, there is a new revolution. And I do not believe in that. I believe that that's a false idea of revolution. But what's interesting is that relative to that context, the problem is that there is not enough cultural, if you want, influence in terms of how we are absorbing technology. In other words, we are all the time actualizing form through technology, but culturally speaking, I believe that architecture is not saying much to technology, So in a way, the book tries to problematize the relation between one and the other. That's why we invited theoreticians, historians to be part of the book. As Alexis mentioned, I work at the Cooper Union. I've been a professor there for 10 years, and if you know a little bit about the Cooper Union, it's a place where representation is in itself a problem, meaning that the project starts not outside of the medium through which you are representing the project. In other words, the frame, the context in which you develop a project becomes part of the agency of the project. That's why I was interested in teaching in Cooper Union and setting up a new kind of, if you want, problematic related to digital representation, because at Cooper Union, I don't know if you're aware, but the drawing by hand and the self-expression is a heavy sort of influence in the school. So I was interested in bringing these problems up to the school in terms of what's happening with the digital. So, as I said, the digital is informed by technology, but not so much through cultural problems. So I believe that our role as architects is to try to get involved into how is it that algorithms are structuring information, how that information structures form, how that form ends up structuring space. And I wanted to start by giving a very graphic example about what I mean. For instance, in this painting by Lorenzetti, there is a very particular problem, which is that or at least I'm interested in this painting because for those of you that know the painting, the content of the painting, the interface through which the painting is being produced, which is the interface is perspectival methodology, right? And the frame of the painting, the three things are coordinated at the same level and they constitute the meaning of the painting. So what's mostly interesting is that the vanishing point, the vanishing point is where the lines convey, signifies the presence of God in the painting that is mediating between Mary and the angel, right? So what's most important about this painting is that it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. What it matters is that there is an idea of God being represented at this point, being manifested physically through the technology of the painting. So technology, representation, deep structure, and superficial structure, they all convey into a higher degree of signification. But the problem of perspective, of course, perspective was criticized by many artists and architects. The problem is that it's a linear system of representation. So I thought that it was interesting to think about Las Meninas by Velázquez as a displacement of a linear system of representation. You probably know this painting, but this is Velázquez, which is the painter that is painting the painting. We are in front of that painting, and all of a sudden, the perspectival axiom is looping into a single topology in which you become part of the painting. So what's interesting is that the system of representation in this case is being displaced to present a political idea, but also a representational idea that activates the idea of the painting. So in this case, you cannot separate the medium through which the painting is being constructed and the content of the painting. They both work at the same cognitive level. So the interesting thing to me relative to digital architecture is that every time there is a new software release, there is a certain kind of signification that software technique starts influencing into the way that we perceive or the way that we construct architecture. And I believe that it is problematic, the fact that we do not recognize what is the signification that those software influence into what we are doing. We do it, we think about Maya, we think through Rhino, but we are not aware of the displacement that those software interfaces produce. The same happens with processing, with more advanced languages that are common today. Each software, in a way, has a certain kind of ideology, a certain kind of aesthetic, and a certain way of doing things. So I thought that I would think about the problem in the sense of Jacques Derrida, in the sense that language, the way that we speak about the world, produces a certain signification to the world. In other words, the moment that we represent something through language, we are naming something, but we're also making a construction about what that thing is. In other words, if I name that a chair, the problem of that being a chair is going to be activated also through the problem of naming that a chair. So in a similar sense, the way that I'm trying to understand digital signification occurs at the same level. The moment that we represent a vector in a certain way, through a certain algorithmic logic, the form of the algorithm and the form of the vector, the way that it is actualized in the screen, and the way that we use that vector produces signification. So there is a certain way to think that any software, in a way, it has a condition of a language, a condition of producing signification. So the way that that I understand that problem is that I make, this is a project by students, for instance, a landscape project. I make them work through different interfaces, recognizing in each interface what's the logic of that interface and how that logic is being activated through the project, resisted through the project, and eventually displaced within the form of the project. And I believe that you have to go back and forth, that you have to think of the way organization is being produced in the form of an algorithm, and then think of the project and try to index that condition within the logic of the project. So you see, all of us, we work in terms of layering information, but the question is, how is it that you take ownership over the information that you're manipulating? There are several, if you want, currents of thought today related to authorship. Authorship to me is becoming a big problem today when you use a computer, because obviously when you're developing a form using the computer, you are partially expressing a range within what the computer lets you do, right? And within that range, you do not see outside of that range, meaning that you are within a system, and to come up with solutions that are outside the system is virtually impossible. So the question is how you understand the range and how you understand your position relative to what you do and relative to what the software allows you to do. So within that, this project, for instance, puts back and forth a rationality of an algorithm related to a topography. So both the topography of the site and the typology of the project, they are reacting against each other. But thinking not only that you are working with a deep code, but also that there is a moment in the project that the project acquires a certain autonomy independently from the series of processes that, that were informing the project. So I'm going to show you a couple of projects that somehow put into motion these problems, but ranging a little bit more from landscape to object. I believe that during the last 20, 30 years, because of site specificity, topologos, the logic of the place, the landscape, the discipline of architecture expanded its boundaries relative to other disciplines. But I think that now, because of computation, we're going back to rethink the architectural container relative to all these processes and relative to a certain kind of unfolding of the discipline relative to how we constitute a space in itself. So I want to show you, this is a project that we did in Buenos Aires, and it was interesting because we work with real environmental forces. We work with a geological engineer trying to balance the shore by adding sedimentation and adding certain obstacles into the environment so that the shore was balanced out of a process of dynamic forces. So out of that, and I'm going to maybe jump a little bit fast through it, out of that I thought, how do you think in terms of dynamic forces through the new tools of computation? And I thought that it was interesting in itself, not only the fact that nowadays we need to deal with environmental forces, but the fact that how you deal with environmental forces is a problem in itself. And what are the codings and the way to simulate environmental forces, and how those actually activate a certain signification to the project. So this is a project made with C language. It's completely scripted. And the idea was to start from, this is Manhattan. It's a very abstract notion of Manhattan, of course. We start with the grid, and then progressively we start getting into the river, because obviously the city needs certain thinking about the protection of the flooding, the water coming in, etc., etc. So the question was, how do you simulate environmental forces, and what is it that you do with that, and how you think about the coding in itself as part of the process. This is how sediments are floating in the river and how they start accumulating in the shore. So what we did with this project was, if you do a mental collage between the grid, the way the things split, and the shore, we are combining the topography, the real topography of Manhattan relative to its border, and trying to deal on a step-by-step process to how the bifurcation of a street could be both thought in terms of infrastructure that would divert the water, but also in the water think about how the sediments would start collecting and grow a certain kind of land formations to protect the shore as well. And then we did a series of experiments using 3D printing and running simulations also virtually and physically. But the interesting thing about this is not only, obviously, we're all working with environmental forces because we think that architecture has to deal with that, but I'm more interested in the representation of environmental forces in themselves as part of the problem, right? As part of a political problem in terms of architecture, in terms of how you develop your condition of how to represent fluidity, and what is it that you do with that. So this is the island of Manhattan. It's a different project. And this last semester, this is a project from this semester, we were focusing on the relation between the typology of the urban fabric as a code, as a building code, and how that would start reacting with environmental forces. And start thinking that the city is not really a stable object, but it's an object that is transformed through time, and we were trying to depict how we were working with that transformation and how that transformation would end up influencing the typology of the urban fabric. And we came up with a complete redefinition of Manhattan. This could be thought as a code. It's not that we're destroying Manhattan, but we are thinking that Manhattan has to be thought in a complete different dimension, because you have, obviously, there is a lot of flooding, therefore the shore is in constant shift, and you need to rethink the typologies because they are going to be flooded as well. And we come up with certain ideas of how to deal with that. So the question, the reason why I show you those projects is that they're all made with different interfaces, and they all have its own way of dealing with information. They all have a certain way of relating information with each other, and they all have a certain click or a certain displacement over the code that they are working with. So I believe that the first step relative to using computation is to recognize that there is a certain activation in terms of the problem of a project through representation. That it is not the same to represent your project through one language or through a different language. And then to understand how that language is actually presenting a structure to your project. It's presenting a certain origin, if you want, which is problematic. So I came up with different ways of expressing this problem. This is a diagram. These are different languages. And I'm trying to map the way that we think algorithmically and how that algorithmic logic is somehow influencing in the way that we organize space. And if there is an influence between one and the other, that's Grasshopper, the other one is Maya, these are bifurcating diagrams, etc., etc. If there is a way to acknowledge the relation between one and the other, then what do you do in the project, which is the last column? that would be a displacement over that logic, meaning that if you can displace the logic of the algorithm, meaning that you are on the route of creating a new algorithm, and you can demonstrate that within the project, then your project is going to start becoming critical of the way it is being constituted. So there is a relationship between the origination of information and the way that we organize space. But within the way that we organize space, we need to be conscious about how we produce a displacement of a separation or a critique in terms of how that information is being actualized. So the idea here is that basically that if we do not break the logic of the algorithm that is given to us, we are not really the owners of what we are producing. In other words, we cannot account for the origin of our project. And that, I think, is very problematic because there are two things, right? On the one hand, we are exploring a range over what the software allows us to do, meaning that we are not the authors. We are just designing a range over the possibilities that the software are allowing us to do. And the second thing is that the software programmer, the person that is on a higher level than you, on a meta level, things that you don't see, is in reality the one that is setting up the aesthetic, the direction, and the conditions of your project, the site of your project. So I believe that if you do not take control over those conditions, if you do not take an attitude or a political, if you want, position over that, you're not really the author of what you're doing. It is a little bit of a controversial, if you want, statement, but I'm going to show you, or try to show you, what are the consequences of not thinking that like that, or maybe what is the way to activate, if you want, a displacement of the origin, of the idea of origin in a project. So this is basically what I was explaining before, that there is a relation between the interface, that the interface is producing signification, and the form is indexing the coding of the interface, right? There is a relation between the three levels, and that's why this lecture is called Form-Inform, because there's a relation between information processing and the way that form is produced, but also form has a certain kind of condition after it is being constituted. These are certain student projects. They are a little bit like short exercises that they try to problematize the idea of origin in the work. This one is interesting because it's a Cartesian space, X, Y, and Z. And the idea of this project is that the one axis becomes part of the other axis, right? And it becomes a little bit of a single topology, right? In other words, the space of the project engages with the space of representation. The X, Y, and Z, which are the three axes that we usually work with, they become part of the dynamic mechanism through which the project is constituted. But what happens once you recognize that there are certain problems in the algorithm, that there are certain problems in the formal logic, and that you need to go beyond that? The question of criticizing the origin, how you start a project, is very important to me. We have been dealing a lot with process, with methodologies of form making, of architecture making, but I believe that we did not question too much the origin. How do we start a project? And the question of how you start a project also has to do with until what point, through a parametric logic, when do you stop the mechanism? When do you stop the machine that is producing the project? And one of the ideas that I've been working with has to do with this condition of finding a moment within the parametric exploration in which the parameters are being surpassed by the project. In other words, that there is a change, a certain qualitative change that would help you to escape the set of parameters that you build up through the project. And I'm going to show you maybe some projects that they try to accomplish that. These are all parametric surfaces that they are done algorithmically in one axis and the other. And the point is not just simply to produce formal difference, but really to take care of a certain typological transformation. So there are certain relationships here in this very simple gridded organization. The question is how this parameter set up a new typological parameter in this building. In this case, it's a house. In the following project, in this project that I'm going to show you, it is important to think that you see, there's a lot of architects that have been working with surfaces. The surface, I think, in itself is a problem relative to computer language, because we understood that the last 20 years have been dominated by surfaces. Everybody worked with surfaces. To me, it is obvious that that was a consequence of working with surfaces in the computer. So therefore, how do you problematize the surface? And how you problematize the fact that the surface, any surface that you produce in the computer, is always going to be acknowledged by a Cartesian space, right? So I thought about the Moebius strip. This is a very simple surface that wraps, like enfolds the ground surface. So I believe that the Moebius strip was a very important surface for architecture because motivated the condition of the ground in itself. Then the Klein bottle dealt mostly with two planes, with the horizontal plane and the facade. So therefore the volume was produced by motivating the two planes. But I believe that there's no diagram in architecture today, at least, that dealt simultaneously with the three X, Y, and Z dimensions. So the intention of this exercise, or this house actually, was to start motivating the background of the computer space as part of the logic of the project. So we found this topology, we sort of like work with this topology, in which one single surface brings X, Y, and Z together. But not only that it brings it together, but the positive and the negative sides of the plane, they are wrapped because this whole relates to the corner of the other. And everything becomes a single topology. And what's interesting about this topology is that you can explain it also in Cartesian terms, because the corner of one figure becomes the center of the other figure. And that, I thought it was very interesting from a typological point of view relative to the problem that the surface is always containing space, and therefore this surface wraps space but also constitutes an idea of a corner and constitutes an idea of a center. So therefore the center of one space becomes the Poche space of the other, and everything is within a single topology. These are different expressions of the house. And these are parametric exercises on the exploration of that topology. This is what I basically just explained, which becomes very interesting because you see here, these are two Moebius strips that make one Klein bottle, and in each axis that's repeated, meaning that there are 6 Moebius strips and 3 Klein bottles, which makes this geometry. And that geometry makes this interesting combination between the 3 parts of the house. In general, this house, what's interesting is that it is a tower, it is a horizontal element, it's another horizontal element, and then the courtyards of each other become continuous within the form of the other. So the 3 distinct typological elements, they are wrapped into one another and they become continuous with each other. These are just exploring what happens inside and outside. Lately, because of this problem of the surface, I decided during the last 2 years at the Cooper Union not to work with surfaces anymore and to work with specific parameters in themselves and think if the parameter, if the parametrics in the project, if the parametrics in an algorithm is the problem because it sets up a standard, it sets up the organization of the project, it sets up the order of the project, how do you problematize that standard, how do you displace that reference, and how do you attack the idea of the parameter in itself? So what we did was to, you see what's interesting about this project, and I maybe explained very fast, is the fact that you cannot recognize where the grid is, or at least you cannot recognize what the original grid is. Because if you think about the way the space is divided here, and the way the space is divided there is obviously one is the opposite of the other, and the game is in there, right? In establishing a first parameter and thinking that the project is going to exploit that parameter and go beyond that parameter. This is a different student project, and there are also grid variations, but grid variations thinking about the idea of topology, thinking that each space in the grid could be completely different from the other or from the next one. So we develop a sort of topographical grid, if you want. That's another one where he developed an algorithm where each of the references of the grid becomes in contact with another one, and then it produces a certain kind of variation that goes beyond the idea of the grid. And this one that I think is, I mean, at least technically speaking, is one of the most interesting ones, is that this project was produced in a software named Processing. And I don't know if you know, but processing is a language where you have to build the canvas where you are representing what you're doing. And that is a problem in itself. It became the problem of this building. So instead of like coding the building inside the canvas, we decided to code the canvas at the same time that we were coding the building. So in other words, the computer space is being formulated in parallel to the space of the house, in this case, which is a building. So as you can see, the figure ground architectural problem becomes activated through the logic of the software. In other words, the background of the computer space is being coded with the same amount of energy than the coding of the object that becomes the building. So the space is composed by the articulation of the background and the foreground, which they become of equal value. So this slide implies also a sort of, if you want, a controversial statement, which is the fact that because computation is virtually absorbing everything today, it's absorbing our lives, it's absorbing our genetic codes in our bodies, it's absorbing the things that we eat, everything, right? It's absorbing also history. And I believe that it is a problem, of course. I studied architecture looking at history, but I believe that today there's a lot of young architects that they are not looking too much at history, but they're looking more to the previous algorithm as a history in itself, meaning that they take the algorithm that a professor does, or they take the algorithm of a famous architect, and they just manipulate that algorithm, and that is becoming a sort of like a history in itself. And I believe that that right now is constituting something that can be called a historic architecture. In a way, the problem of that is that we are building a new structuralism. We are developing a new modernism. We are in a new, I believe, in a new problematic era that has to do with the fact that we are laying a new rationale to the world, a new order that has to do with algorithmic logic, and that is constituting a problem to architecture in itself, right? So relative to that, of course, you can think that algorithms do not have the logic of architecture. I completely agree with that. The question is, how is it that architecture can inform computation, and how is it that architecture can actually tell something to technology, so that actually there is a certain kind of relationship between our discipline as a discipline and the logic of computation in itself as a rationale, right? So now I'm going to finish by showing you the book and how is it that we dealt with these problems relative to the people that we invited and relative to the content of the book in itself. The book is pretty big. It's 352 pages, and one of the discussions that we had from the conference that Alexis was mentioning, that we also co-chaired with Aaron Sprecher, which is the partner in this project, was that the fact that we understood that most architects were understanding form in a visual terms, and not so much taking care of what was happening behind the scenes, at the coding level. That was one of the problems. But the other problem was the fact that there's a disjunction between theory, history, and computation. In other words, that historians, they are against computation, and I think that they have the reason to be against it. I believe that theoreticians are also completely detached from what's going on in computation. And the idea of this book was to generate a dialogue. There is a lot of people that wrote in the book, and we have different positions. Sometimes those positions are against each other. We found that that was necessary and interesting. But one of the things that we did with the book was to organize the book in chapters. So therefore we have 6 chapters. The first chapter is this chapter, which is relating history theory relative to computation. So in other words, we have people like Georges Tissot, Antoine Picon, Mario Carpo, which they present their ideas on the relation between technology, computation, and architecture from a historical point of view and from a theoretical point of view. And we have also within that chapter people like Bernard Cash, Patrick Schumacher, for instance, the partner of Zaha Hadid, that have maybe a certain agenda, ideological agendas within computation. Then we have people like Mark Linder, Ingo Rocker, Evan Douglas, etc., etc. So the interesting thing is that the first chapter, in a way, problematizes the relation between history theory and design, in a way. And obviously we have a certain background for it, which has to do with problems of cognition, problems of whether computation is a new structuralism or not, is presenting a new condition or not, problems of aesthetics, problems of perception, etc., etc. So each architect, historian, and theoretician presents the problem in a different way. Mario Carpo, for instance, is very interesting because my idea of authorship is a little bit the opposite of his idea of authorship. Mario Carpo says that we are relegating authorship to software programmers, and that's interesting. For him, it's interesting that we can crowdsource a design, and therefore authorship is shared between the engineer, the architect, and all the people that conform the platform for the building. I think that that's interesting, but I think that that's a default of a software. And I believe that we have to think about how we claim authorship rather than how we lose authorship relative to computation. So these are some pics of the interior of the book. That's Aaron's introduction. The first one is mine. That's Patrick Schumacher's work in the Angewandte in the AA in London. And these are the chapter breaks. These chapter breaks are kind of interesting because they present, all this is an algorithm that John Carpenter and Chandler Arendt designed, which relates in terms of content how each of the authors relate to each other, and we develop a diagram. They develop a diagram of how that relationship was made. The second chapter is a chapter that relates more to directly to architects that work with the coding. That, in other words, that they are not so interested in the way the things look like, but they are more interested in the way the things are organized. So within this chapter, we have these architects. The book progressively, between chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, builds up a progression between deep structures, people that work more at the organizational level, to people that work more with problems of vision and perception. So therefore, this is the first chapter. Dillers Corfidio, DSR, they submit a very interesting project that has to do with mapping, visualization of information. And then we have Alejandro Serapolo that they gave us a small installation. Or, for instance, the work of, we have an interview with Georges Legendre that works with mathematical scripting. So each chapter is very clearly organized because you have an introductory interview, then you have a series of projects that deal with the problem, and then you have a closing essay of an intellectual that tries to wrap up what's happening in that chapter. These are some images of chapter 2, sorry. This is Diller Scorfidio exit project. And this is the chapter break for chapter 3, which relates more to questions of dynamic information in terms of the way that we deal with environmental forces, which was a very interesting chapter because we did not invite people that they think about ecological architecture only, right? But people that they problematize what is ecology today relative to processing, relative to algorithmic logics, and relative to computation. So we have, for instance, we have a very interesting team that is the Center for Architecture, Science and Ecology case, that is RPI and SOM, which they did a very interesting project that deals with a facade that filters sun according to how you move within a space. We have obviously, this is a French architect, Philippe Ram, that deals with the temperature as a way of delimiting space and how you map that as part of the problem. And then we have other projects like Lydia Kalliopoliti, that they develop systems through which the environment becomes part of the logic of the building. And then we have a closing essay by Chris Perry. And these are some images of the interior of that chapter. Then the chapter where actually by chance, I believe, both my office work and Aaron's work is in this one, which is introduced by Carl Chu, is the 4th chapter. Then we have people like Eisenman, Preston Cohen, and Andrew Saunders and Hans Meyer. And this chapter deals with a certain interesting idea about parametric logic, evolution, how you put form, how you displace form, and how you build up a process relative to the project. The closing essay is, of course, by your professor Alexei Meyer, which obviously worked with Eisenman, so it worked very well for us, the relationship between the introduction, the people that participated in this project, in the projects inside this chapter, and the closing essay. So this is actually, these are the projects that are within that. That's a project that I explained to you, etc. These are some images of the interior of the book relative to that chapter. The 5th chapter is a very interesting one because it relates information to materiality. Usually information has been separated from materialization, and we thought to invite particularly people that were thinking about that problem. Maybe even we do not agree with some of the solutions, but it's interesting that they're trying to compute the logic of the material and compute the logic of the algorithms and try to put organization and materialization in relationship to each other. This chapter is introduced with an interview to Ciro Nagle, which is currently the dean in Buenos Aires. And then there are projects by Nader Terani that always work very interesting relationship between materiality and organization. And then it's Tom Main from Morphosis, Reiser Umemoto. Roland Snooks is very interesting because he's bringing the logic of materiality within the processing. And then Philip Wesley. And it's closed by an essay by Akim Menges, that is a professor in Stuttgart, which I believe is one of the most advanced research in terms of thinking on how the logic of the material is informing the logic of the interface or the logic of the algorithm. And these are some images of that. These are Nader Terani's installations, and they were very interesting and very famous. That's a building by Morphosis, etc. And then the last chapter of the book is introduced by an interview to Greg Lynn, and within that chapter, as I mentioned to you before, this is information affect, which is how the relationship with the viewer and the experience are more part of the logic of the project. So we are here at the ending chapter, and we are at the extreme of the range of information processing relative to these questions. So we have David Rui and other architects and artists. This is a building by Matias del Campo, Chinese pavilion, very interesting one. And this is a project by Rui and Klein. And finally, there is a little bit of an explanation how these chapter breaks are being developed and what's the relationship between the different architects. These are pics of the entire book, of all the graphic information of the book. And with this, I mean, I was going to mention other things, but I think it's enough. With this, I close with the back cover of the book. But, thanks. Thanks for your attention. So I believe that we have to talk, right? Yeah, you may have some problems with what I said, and
no, I don't have problems. But first, thank you.
Maybe
thank you for all this information. And there's a lot.
That's a lot, right?
That's a lot.
I hope that they didn't get overwhelmed.
No, that's fine. But you know, we recorded the lecture. That's why we can we can see it again to understand. Of course, I have a few questions, but maybe before I took a chance to give the mic to the students. Même en français, si vous voulez, je traduis. Des questions simples, vous n'avez pas même intuitives.
I'm interested in the people that do not agree. Actually, I'm a person that enjoys discussion. But do you all agree with what I said? Because there's a lot of problems, and obviously what I presented is something that is on the work, is research,
okay,
so it's not resolved, right?
Okay, I agree, but a few, let's say, interrogation. So, in fact, I have only one question, but it's a transversal question. I think it's one of the key issue of what you propose to us through the let's say critical lecture of the new tools of architecture. So you say part of the computer logic is part of the project when you present some of your student project. I want to know in which term you understand that, you propose that, and following this, under which condition the computer logic could be a cognitive logic.
Yeah.
And also, to finish...
That's like already true.
Yeah, I know. But also to finish, for you evoked it, but what constitutes the new order you look for? You talk about new order, you talk about new logic, you talk about computer logic, you talk about cognitive logic, you talk about space logic, but what makes you, let's say not the right, but the idea that you have to link all this differently, that's what the tradition linked it before?
Well, there are like three very big things. So the first one was
the first one is you say part of the computer logic is part of the project.
So
I want to know in which term you understand.
In which term?
You propose
I thought that this one project, this is a very important thing to me that is very clear. That is not just because there's a lot of speculation with formal logic, and there is not enough precision, I believe. And the way that I deal with that problem is from the minimum sign. Like, let's say, if you draw a pixel in the computer, it's not the same as if you draw a vector point, right? So this project, for instance, I don't know if it was clear the way that I explained it, but you see this project starts with two signs, two architectural signs. The point as a vectorial point, meaning it doesn't have any physicality, it's a point that determines space, and the point as a pixel. The moment that you draw with a pixel, that sets up a certain thickness. So the idea of this space is that the two parameters, the vector parameter and the pixel parameter, they become part of the logic of the project, and then the grid, right, instead of making a repetitive grid, the grid itself, the vector or the pixel, the two ways of making a grid, they become ambiguous. they start producing a certain, if you want, displacement. I believe in the idea of displacement, that is like giving a certain order, you have to have the role of inventing a new condition. And I believe that this project is trying to develop a new typology of order.
Okay, but how do you, let's say, how do you evaluate that this new geometrical condition is a new architectural condition?
Well, the evaluation is in the performance of each of the spaces. So if you see there is one space there that is open, right? On the other end, the spatial containment is the opposite.
Sure.
So there is a clear range, right?
Sure, but in which term this space is architectural more than sculptural?
Well, we obviously work with the body. I didn't explain that, but this is a house for 3 families.
That's important.
But the body is a measurement. So that room is 7 feet by 7 feet. The in between, I don't remember. No, I think it's 10 by 10, and the in between was 2 feet. And then in the other end, so there is obviously there is an architectural scale, if you want. And I'm very clear about that, and I don't believe in architectural sculpture. That would be a misreading of my architecture. I don't believe that you do a form and that becomes architecture. I'm against that notion. Here there is the idea of...
that's a very important point, that a student has to understand that it's not an expressionist
No, it's not.
process.
I believe that...
that is more structural and logical processing more than graphic processing or expressionist processing. I mean,
well, in this case, it has all to do with walking, like experience. You see the space accelerates, so you will feel that in your body, right? Okay. And then the occupation of space is reversed. So I believe that you see the kind of functions that will happen in this space, in that space, or in that space. You see here you are more secluded, so that's closer to a bedroom. Here you are in a more public space because the space is more open and fluid. And here you are in a different kind of enclosed space that is not that, right? It's the opposite of that because it's built with the opposite negative part of the grid, and it proclaims a different kind of use. So you have 2 private spaces, a public space in the middle. So all those things are tested, obviously, in the project. I didn't explain that because, obviously the focus was more on the... But I'm interested in that problem, yeah.
And also...
He has a question.
I just... you want the... I just finish my question. If it is possible for you just to summarize that, which order do you try to escape and which order do you try to go?
Well, that's to me the most important thing. Because you see there is an ideological problem and I have an ideological position. I believe that, you see the corporations today, they have been hiding order. They tell you that everything is fine, right? If you go to Facebook, everything seems that it's so free and open. Google is supposed to be so free and open, when in reality, you are very restricted to the kind of liberty that you have, right? So there is order that is imposed into us all the time, but we are not aware of how much whatever we do every day, how much that depends on something that we control or something that is imposed to us. So I believe that the danger today is that interfaces are prescribing our behavior, that every day we are doing things that we are not aware of. The Marxist thing would be first to describe what those conditions are, to be aware of how much you're being manipulated by a certain algorithm, and then to claim that the order or the organization that you're playing in your behavior or in your architecture is under your control and is not given to you. So that's the main condition.
Are you saying that with this kind of ideology, architects can now use computer as a political tool?
Yes, because I believe that the most political thing that you can do today is to be a hacker, a computer hacker, in architectural terms. Like you cannot do politics by... I believe that as an architect, you have to do politics within the limits of your field. And I believe that the most political act of our field is representation. That, for instance, when a model is photoshopped right? To have an ideal body, that is a representational problem that informs reality. People become like that rendering. And I believe that we have the same power, that architects have the power to represent space, to represent how manifestations are being produced, to represent the city. And within that representation, that's the most active and powerful tool that we have to change the world. I don't think that as an architect, I would go and demonstrate in the square. I would modify the way people are gathering in the square through algorithmic logic. You know, if I can modify the way that people are relating to each other in that square through, you see, Facebook was the activator of the upraise in Egypt, right? It was a Facebook-driven problem. Media was part of the political problem. Some people agree with that, some people don't. The fact that internet was cut was the first activator of the revolution. People went to the square because their communication skills were cut. So to me, if you think in terms of architecture, I believe that we have a duty and a responsibility to acknowledge with that at that level. And that's our political role.
Maybe a question.
Yeah.
It's okay. I understand why it's so important to understand how our tools work, but
I'm not talking about tools. I think it's a problem.
The software.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know, how do you balance because you go very deep inside.
I'm not talking about software also, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about algorithms.
Yeah, no, you talk about the vector or something like that. Or the structure of the dimension. But how do you? It's very informal in the first view. Like for a student, you see that you see some forms.
I don't know. So it's very informal.
I don't know how to say that. It's very hard to understand what does it mean.
It's very hard. Well, the thing is that this is Cooper Union, and in Cooper Union, the moment you enter to the school, you are forced to think through the medium, and I know that it's hard.
Yeah, but I understand. But my question was, how do you find the balance between this kind of representation and the real feeling in the space when you are inside of the space?
That's the point, that they are not separated. You see, that's what Lorenzetti understood through the painting. The first painting that I showed you understands that. You see, in the Renaissance, that's why I wanted to show a little bit of history. We had the same problem in the Renaissance. There was a new order that had to do, the new order in the world, presented through a medium of representation. When Brunelleschi established the vanishing point, an architecture that followed the vanishing point, he developed the first parametric space. That's a parametric space because the things diminish and they have an order. It's a linear order, right? So that's the understanding. The modernism, to me, the modern thinking started in the Renaissance because it's the acknowledgement that the medium is the content. You see, there's no separation between the medium and the content. That's the people that work in media, they have that very clear. And they want you not to know that. They want you not to have that clear because they want you to inform you without you realizing. So the medium is the message, right? There's no message independently from the medium of communication. That's the concept of the signifier of Derrida. That the moment that you name something, the moment that you represent something, you're activating a content in itself. The question is whether that content is activated by you or by the interface.
Okay.
That's what the problem
so
starts.
It's more, so if I understand, it's about how do we understand the spaces and how can we match it? Comment on peut le
how you think the
figurize
space.
it in our brain? How can we figurize it? So it's about it. It's about
yes.
What can we do now with our possibilities to re-understand the spaces?
Well, the thing is not that you see the understanding or not understanding. It has to be a construction. You see, the moment that you think space, there's no space outside representation. You see, this space exists,
yeah, it's the same
right?
thing, yeah.
So you see, the moment, you see, the problem is that usually architects think in a predetermined manner. They think, okay, Le Corbusier thought space like that, that's space. No, in reality, the moment that you are thinking about space, you are building an idea about space. So the question is how you construct that condition, and how are you in control of the condition that you're building. I think that, you see, in that sense, this space, the space that we are here now, has a lot of ideology. You know, it has the cladding is presented one way. There is an angle there in the back. So there's a lot of conditions that present a certain, if you want, position about what architecture is. The question is, how are you able to challenge the typology of this space relative to how it is made? Is there a relationship between how we think space, how we organize space, how we represent space, and how we end up building space? I'm trying to problematize the relation between the two, from origination to destination, from coding to communication, right? Because the moment that you are in a space, the space is communicating with you. So you are also in the same problem. It starts again, you know? The moment that you take a picture of this space, there is a mediation in terms of the communication. So there's another loop coming after. The moment that you take a picture of a building in Facebook and that becomes a destination, that produces signification in a different way, right? So they're all interfaces, mediation, origination, they're all interconnected. The problem is that we are not in control of it, you know?
So it's about our unknowledge creates the impression that we are not connected, not directly connected from our brain to the spaces.
But we are.
But we are. So
yeah.
we have to. You try to find a solution to
problematize.
Yeah,
just to understand the problem.
To question this problematic. Yeah. Okay, I understand.
To problematize. By the way, I think that it's a very different. You see, before we were working with tools. Tools are like McDonald's. You know, you can choose. You know, with cheese, without cheese, but then you don't know what are the tools that you cannot choose. Then you have software, and it's the same problem. It's like different levels of thinking. I believe that we have to go directly to the source. We cannot think of tools. We cannot think of software. We cannot think of interfaces. We need to go all the way to the origination of these problems.
Déjà, merci pour cette conférence très complète et très fournie. Moi, je me pose plusieurs questions, en fait. Une question d'enseignant. Ces outils, en fait, je ne sais pas les utiliser moi-même. Donc, comment s'en servir pour le projet, pour accompagner les étudiants? Donc, ça, c'est une première question. La deuxième, c'est pourrais-je l'utiliser dans mon agence? C'est ce qu'on essaye de faire, parce que ces outils, on sent qu'il y a des potentiels gigantesques, très importants, qui, si on n'a pas ces outils, nous limitent en fait dans la production, et qui font que, par exemple, la façade du bâtiment de Herzog de Meuron à Basel, c'est une façade qui a été dessinée grâce au logiciel Grasshopper.
It's a problem for me, that one. It's very obvious.
Ouais.
It's a problem, yeah.
Donc ça, c'est, je dirais, c'est toujours... évidemment, on se dit que si on n'a pas ce genre d'outils, on va à un moment donné être limité dans la fabrication du projet.
It's about the limit. The limit. Yeah.
Voilà. Et en même temps, l'autre question que je me pose, c'est que quand je vois, par exemple, donc tu parlais de Schumacher là, et de Zahadid notamment, quand on voit, je dirais, presque l'excès de ces projets, enfin je préfère les premiers projets de Zahadid.
Yeah, I agree.
Donc il y a presque...
But it's an interesting problem. It's an interesting problem.
Ouais. Il y a presque un dégoût, en fait. On se dit, tiens, ces outils ont un très grand potentiel, et en même temps, ils ont, comment dire, c'est comme si on était emporté en fait par la capacité de ces outils, et comme si le résultat perdait de son sens. Est-ce que tu as un avis sur
There are different problems. I don't know if I understood everything. I learned French, but I don't know if I... So one is the limit. Like, what's the limit? No? The limit is... no.
He say if let's say some traditional office, they don't use the new tools, they'll find it will be limited in the way to architect. And you say using grasshopper,
It has a limit, yeah.
limited the expression of the
Yeah. So it's the opposite. But what he said about the grasshopper in Herzog de Meuron, that's a big problem to me, actually. It's an interesting big problem.
Et après, j'ai oublié une chose, c'est que demain, il y a des enseignants qui voudraient te présenter le travail de Master 1 qui a été fait avec ces outils-là pour mettre en place.
Ah, okay. Okay. You see, grasshopper to me is a problem because you see the fact that you can see that is done with grasshopper is a problem. Why? Because that means that the aesthetics, the logic, and the ideology is grasshopper, not Herzog de Meuron. It's not architecture. So the problem is a problem of limit. Like if you cannot, that's what I'm trying to do, to go beyond the limit of the tool or the limit of the interface, or understand what is the interface giving you and how to break that frame. If you do not do that, that means that you're only exploring the range of the possibilities that the software allows you to do. That's why Grasshopper became so problematic today, because everybody realizes that even it's interesting because you have the visual algorithm. It's interesting that you're working with the code partially. The problem is that all the projects end up looking the same, right? You can see that they are done, that the hierarchy between the surface and the components of the surface is so limited. It's very evident, right? Because it's an idea of the ideology of the software. But then the other question, Zaha Hadid, that's a very interesting problem. Zaha Hadid before Schumacher, that's what you're pointing out. Zaha Hadid, when she was drawing like that, before getting into parametrics. I believe that there is a very interesting tension between Patrick Schumacher and, this is going online, I'm getting in trouble, but it's fine, because Zaha was aggressive to me, so I can be aggressive. Yes, but I think Patrick Schumacher is a very interesting person. I know he's very criticized because of what you're saying, but to me it's a way of claiming authorship. The fact that Patrick Schumacher doing all these parametric things, thinking more relationally, mentally, than visually. Zaha Hadid is a visual person, right? In the beginning with the paintings, she developed this style of the formation, right? Patrick Schumacher is a mental person. So they are in the opposite ends. And this book is exactly about that problem. And I believe that Patrick Schumacher is claiming authorship over the production of the office by doing what you do not like. So it's becoming more his, the way of organizing an office with 300 people through a parametric logic, through a system, right? Rather than through a personal style. Zaha Hadid is a personal style. Patrick Schumacher brings in all this parametric logic, and all of a sudden it's more about the relationship than the visual. So you see, to me, it's a way of inverting the roles between two partners. That's my way of understanding that. It's a very interesting problem. But I agree with what you're saying. Yeah. I don't know if I answered it. There's another question?
How can we link these two things without becoming our own software programmer?
No, but that's the point to me. But look, all the disciplines today, every single discipline today is dominated by computation. It's not our problem only. It's not architects' problem only. If you go to, cognitive sciences, the way that they understand how the neuron, right, is interacting with another neuron and how you represent that is part, they realize that it is part of the problem in itself. So they hire somebody to visualize that problem, and they realize that that's not what they're looking at. So they need a way of thinking. As a way of thinking, they need somebody to represent what they are thinking. What I'm exploring on my own practice is multidimensional space. I believe that mathematicians, they have very interesting concepts about multidimensional space, but they are not able to visualize it. So I believe that my work is to help them understand or to build from an architectural concept what could be multidimensional space. So you see, I think that architecture in that sense has to inform sciences or help sciences, and the way to do that is to really get into decoding. I don't think that there is a way out. I believe that, you see, in 10 years, in 20 years, if you don't know coding, you are dead. You're going to be a victim of the society. You're not going to be able to do anything because you're only going to be able to do what they allow you to do. The multiple choice or the McDonald's or the icon, you know, the tool, right? Okay, so they show you, okay, this is what you can choose. And you know that there is a reality outside of what they are able to choose, right? But if you are not a hacker, you're not going to be able to, you're going to become really a robot, I mean a zombie, right? Literally. I believe that we are on the way to that. That if you do not really understand what's going on, you're going to be running an algorithm rather than doing what you want to do, which is mass behavior, right? So I think that, in other words, if you don't do it, you're screwed. So.
Ok, donc vous avez compris qu'il faut prendre les armes contre les ordinateurs avant de devenir leur esclave. And finally, all what you say is avoiding alienation.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. You see, I'm not a cheerleader for computation, but I need to understand the problems of computation.
Okay.
Right?
Est-ce d'autres questions?
Okay.
Okay, so
okay,
thank you again, Pablo. It was very great to have you.
Thanks, Alexis. I didn't answer.